Howdy folks, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving headfirst into a topic that's darker than a Louisiana bayou at midnight, the chilling world of criminal justice where the punishment doesn't always fit the crime. We're talking about sentences so severe, so outlandishly long they'd make even the most hardened criminal think twice. Get ready to explore the stories of convicts who got slapped with punishments that would make your head spin faster than a gator in a hurricane. Now you might be thinking, Joe, ain't justice supposed to be blind? Well, sometimes it feels like justice peeked through the blindfold and saw red. We're talking about sentences that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the law. From centuries-old cases to modern-day courtroom dramas, we're gonna uncover the stories behind these jaw-dropping sentences and the folks who received them. We're gonna unravel the hows and whys of these punishments, and trust me, some of these explanations are wilder than a hog on roller skates. Was it a power-hungry judge with an itchy gavel hand, or maybe a legal system stuck in its old ways? Buckle up, folks, because we're about to take a wild ride through the twists and turns of justice gone rogue. We're talking lifetimes behind bars for petty theft, sentences longer than a mama alligator's tail for minor offenses, the kind of stuff that makes you wonder if somebody swapped the law books with a Stephen King novel. So if you're ready to dive into a world of legal oddities and mind-boggling sentences, grab yourself a cold drink, hold on tight, and let's get started. Now, y'all ever heard of a fella getting locked up for life over a jar of pickles? Well, back in 19th century Mississippi, that's exactly what happened to a man named William Francis. This poor soul was caught red-handed trying to make off with a jar of pickled cucumbers. Now, I love a good pickle as much as the next guy, but life in prison for a jar? Seems a tad harsh, don't you think? Turns out back then, Mississippi had some mighty strict laws, especially when it came to property crimes. See, they called it the pig law, and it was designed to crack down on theft no matter how small the item. The idea was to scare folks straight, but I reckon they scared poor William straight into the history books as the pickle pilferer. Now, I ain't condoning thievery, but life behind bars for a jar of pickles? That's enough to make a body pucker up their face in disbelief. It just goes to show that justice ain't always a dish best served cold. Sometimes it's fermented, tangy, and leaves a sour taste in your mouth. Hold on to your hats, folks, because this next story is going to make that pickle punishment seem like a walk in the park. We're talking about a fella named Dudley Wayne Kyzer, who back in 1976 got himself into a heap of trouble in Alabama. Now, Dudley was no saint. He was convicted of murdering his wife, his mother-in-law, and a college student. A terrible, terrible thing, no doubt about it. But here's where it gets wild. The judge in the case, he decided to make an example out of Dudley. He slapped him with not one, not two, but 3 life sentences, one for each victim. And if that weren't enough, he added a little something extra 10,000 years on top of that. Now, I'm no mathematician, but even I know that's a mighty long time. Some folks say the judge was just sending a message, letting the world know that Alabama don't mess around when it comes to serious crimes. Others reckon he might have had a calendar sale he was trying to boost. Whatever the reason, Dudley Wayne Kyzer became a legend in the annals of sentences that just don't quit. Now let's mosey on over to Arkansas, where we meet a fella named Gabriel Prosser. Gabriel, he had a hankering for fried chicken, see? Problem was, he didn't have much of a hankering for paying for it. So one fine day back in 1839, he decided to liberate a couple of cluckers from a neighbor's coop. Now, stealing is wrong, I'll grant you that. But what happened next will make you choke on your grits. Gabriel, he got caught feather-handed, and the judge, he decided to throw the book at him. And I'm talking about a mighty heavy book. You see, back then, stealing livestock, even chickens, was considered grand larceny, a serious offense. So, what was the punishment for our feathered friend-napping friend? A whopping 57 years in prison. That's right, folks. Almost 6 decades for a couple of birds. Now, I reckon those must have been some mighty fine chickens, maybe laying golden eggs or something. Either way, Gabriel Prosser learned the hard way that in Arkansas, chicken ain't nothing to cluck about. Now let's fast forward a bit and talk about a fella named Thomas Howe. This happened back in 1995, and let me tell you, this story's got more layers than a deep dish Chicago pizza. Thomas, he was a delivery driver for a pizza joint, just trying to make an honest living. But one day he got a hankering for a slice of the action, if you catch my drift. He cooked up a scheme to rob the pizza place, figuring he knew the ins and outs better than anyone. Well, his plan went about as smoothly as a pineapple on a pepperoni pizza. He got caught red-handed, dough and all. Now, robbing is wrong, no two ways about it. But what happened next is enough to make your jaw drop faster than a dropped slice of pizza. The judge, he decided to get creative with the sentencing. He gave Thomas 25 years for the robbery, which is already a hefty chunk of time. But here's the kicker. He tacked on an extra year for each of the 52 customers who were inconvenienced that night because their pizza orders were delayed. That's right, folks. 77 years in the slammer, all because of a pizza-fueled crime spree. Now, this next story is enough to make you question if some folks been smoking something a little stronger than tobacco. We're talking about the case of Fate Winslow, a Louisiana man who got caught in the crosshairs of the war on drugs. Back in 2008, Fate was approached by an undercover cop who asked him for some weed. Now, Fate, he wasn't a dealer or nothing, but he knew a guy who knew a guy, so he agreed to help out. He went and got $20 worth of weed from his buddy and gave it to the undercover officer. That's it. That was the extent of his crime. Now, I ain't saying what he did was right, but what happened next is downright mind-boggling. You see, Louisiana has some of the harshest drug laws in the country, and Fate, he got caught in the system's web. Because he had a couple of prior convictions for minor offenses, he was labeled a habitual offender. And you know what that means in Louisiana? Mandatory life in prison, no parole. That's right, folks, a life sentence for $20 worth of weed. It's enough to make you wonder if the whole justice system needs a serious reality check. Now, y'all know I love a good car story, but this one's got a real sour engine. Back in 2007, a woman named Jennifer Boatwright parked her car in a parking garage in Texas. She went about her business, ran some errands, and when she came back, she found a parking ticket slapped on her windshield. No big deal, right? Happens to the best of us. Well, this was no ordinary parking ticket. Seems like Jennifer had parked in a spot reserved for employees of a law firm, and those lawyers, they weren't too happy about it. The parking ticket itself wasn't much. Maybe $100 or so. But Jennifer, she figured it was just a money grab and decided to fight the ticket in court. Now, I admire her spunk, but little did she know she was about to enter a legal battle royale that would drag on for years. You see, the law firm, they weren't going to let this go. They countersued Jennifer for $500,000, claiming her parking violation caused them all sorts of emotional distress and lost wages. The case went back and forth, lawyering up a storm, and in the end, Jennifer was ordered to pay a whopping $3,000. That's right, folks, a $100 parking ticket turned into a $3,000 legal nightmare. It just goes to show sometimes it's cheaper to pay the meter than to fight the man. Now, we've seen some real head-scratchers when it comes to sentencing, and you might be wondering, how in tarnation do these things happen? Well, one of the biggest culprits is a little something called the three strikes law. It's like a baseball game gone wrong, folks, but instead of striking out looking, you're striking out and looking at a lifetime behind bars. The idea behind these laws is to crack down on repeat offenders, folks who just can't seem to stay out of trouble. After 2 convictions, usually for serious felonies, the third strike sends them away for a long, long time, sometimes even life in prison. Sounds good in theory, right? Keep the bad guys off the streets. But the devil's in the details, as they say. Problem is, these laws can be as rigid as a gator's backbone. They don't always take into account the circumstances of the crime, the severity of the offense, or the potential for rehabilitation. You could steal a candy bar on your third strike and end up doing more time than a Wall Street crook. It's enough to make you wonder if justice has lost its way. Now, another piece of this puzzle is the power of the judge. They're the ones holding the gavel, the ones calling the shots when it comes to sentencing. And let's be honest, folks, judges are human too. They got their own beliefs, their own biases, and sometimes those things can creep into the courtroom. Some judges, they're all about tough on crime. They hand out sentences like they're giving away free samples at the grocery store. Others, they believe in second chances, in rehabilitation, and giving folks a chance to turn their lives around. The problem is there's not always a lot of consistency from one courtroom to the next. And then there's the issue of mandatory minimums. These are laws set by politicians, not judges, that dictate a minimum sentence for certain crimes, usually drug offenses. Now, I'm all for keeping dangerous drugs off the streets, but these mandatory minimums can tie a judge's hands, forcing them to hand down sentences that don't fit the crime. It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It just don't work. Section 3, the price of punishment, the economics of incarceration. Now, all this talk about crime and punishment, it ain't just about right and wrong, folks. It's also about dollars and cents. You see, keeping folks locked up, it ain't cheap. In fact, it costs taxpayers a pretty penny. We're talking billions upon billions of dollars every year to run prisons, pay guards, and provide food and health care to inmates. Now, some folks argue that locking people up is the price we pay for a safe society. And I get that, I do. But the question is, are we getting our money's worth? Are we actually reducing crime? Or are we just filling up prisons with nonviolent offenders? Folks who might be better served by rehabilitation programs or community service. See, the thing is, a lot of folks who end up in prison, they come out worse than when they went in. They lose their jobs, their families, their connection to society. And when they get out, it's tough to turn things around. They got a criminal record, no job prospects, and they're more likely to end up back behind bars. It's a vicious cycle, folks, and it's costing us all a fortune. Now, y'all know I love a good laugh as much as the next fella, and believe it or not, even in the serious world of criminal justice, there's some head-scratching and chuckle-worthy facts to be found. For instance, did you know that in the early 1900s, a fella in West Virginia was sentenced to 15 years in prison for stealing a 5-cent loaf of bread? Seems like a steep price to pay for a sandwich, even with inflation. And speaking of unusual punishments, back in the day, judges had a bit more creative license when it came to handing down sentences. Instead of sending folks to prison, they might order them to do things like grow a beard, attend church every Sunday for a year, or even write 1,000 lines on a chalkboard. Talk about old school detention. One of my personal favorites is the story of a judge who sentenced a noisy defendant to hold his peace. Literally. The fella had to stand in the public square with his mouth taped shut for an entire day. Now, I reckon that would teach anyone a lesson about the importance of holding their tongue. Now let's step inside the big house for a minute and uncover some intriguing tidbits about life behind bars. Did you know that the world's largest prison, the New Bilibid prison in the Philippines, houses over 40,000 inmates? That's like a small city, folks, with its own rules, its own economy, and I imagine its own unique brand of prison cuisine. Speaking of food, prison meals don't exactly have a reputation for culinary excellence. But believe it or not, some prisons have cooking competitions where inmates can show off their skills and whip up some surprisingly tasty dishes using the limited ingredients available. I reckon a little creativity goes a long way when you're stuck behind bars. And here's a fun fact for you. Alcatraz, the infamous island prison in San Francisco Bay, was said to be escape-proof. But did you know that there were actually 14 reported attempts to escape from the Rock? Now, none of them were officially successful, but it just goes to show that when it comes to freedom, some folks are willing to take a chance, even if it means swimming through icy waters infested with sharks. Well, folks, we've waded through a whole heap of legal oddities, from pickle pilferers to pizza passion punishments. We've seen how the long arm of the law can sometimes swing a little too far, landing folks behind bars for what seems like an eternity. It's enough to make you wonder if the scales of justice are a little out of whack. We've talked about the 3 strikes law, mandatory minimums, and the power of judicial discretion, all factors that can tip the scales one way or the other. And we've seen how the high cost of incarceration can sometimes outweigh the benefits of locking folks up. It's a complex issue, no doubt about it. There's no easy answers, no one-size-fits-all solution. But I think it's important to keep these stories in mind, to remember that behind every sentence, every conviction, there's a human being with their own story to tell. Now, I ain't no lawyer, and I don't claim to have all the answers, but I do know this. Our justice system, it's a human-made system, and like any human-made thing, it's bound to have its flaws. It's like an old truck, running on fumes and held together with duct tape and prayer. It might get you where you need to go, but it ain't pretty, and it sure ain't efficient. Maybe it's time for a tune-up, folks. Time to take a good hard look at our sentencing guidelines, our approach to rehabilitation, and the way we fund our criminal justice system. We need to find a way to balance the need for public safety with the principles of fairness and justice for all. Because at the end of the day, justice shouldn't be about punishment for punishment's sake. It should be about rehabilitation, restoration, and giving folks a chance to turn their lives around. And who knows, maybe someday we'll look back on these insane sentences as relics of a bygone era, a time when justice was blind, deaf, and a little too quick to reach for the gavel. Thanks for listening, y'all. And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay out of trouble.